Uh, so when we think about samurai, right, we usually picture these, fearless warriors, swords, honor, bushido, all that stuff. But what if I told you there was another side of their world that almost never gets talked about? A side that's honestly way darker, way more disturbing. See, hidden in old diaries and temple records, there are these accounts of what the samurai were really doing behind closed doors. And it wasn't just about fighting wars. It was about control, about power, and, yeah, about sex. These weren't like love stories. They were rituals, secret practices that shaped loyalty, submission, and, honestly, the whole structure of samurai life. And once you hear this, you'll probably never look at samurai the same way again. In 17th century Japan, a monk's diary was discovered that revealed something almost no history book dares to mention. It described samurai not on the battlefield, but in their private chambers, where sex was ritualized, controlled, and weaponized to enforce loyalty. These weren't acts of love, they were acts of power. And what they reveal about the samurai class is far darker than the code of Bushido ever admits. It began in whispers, hidden in temple records, in the private diaries of wives, and in scrolls confiscated by the Tokugawa authorities. There are stories that the official history of Japan rarely tells. When we think of the samurai, we imagine men bound by the code of Bushido, devoted to honor, loyalty, and the art of war. Yet behind the walls of their estates and within the rigid structure of their society, another code existed, one that governed desire, control, and the most intimate aspects of life. This was a secret world of ritualized sexuality, one where power was expressed not only with the sword, but with the body. For centuries, these practices remained hidden, protected by silence and shame. But when scholars began combing through forgotten archives in Kyoto, Edo, and Kamakura, they uncovered a darker layer of samurai culture. Letters exchanged between retainers and their lords, records of punishments meted out for improper desires, and even love poems written in coded phrases all pointed to the same truth. Sex, in the world of the samurai, was never merely about pleasure. It was about loyalty, hierarchy, and the brutal logic of survival. In a samurai household, a wife's body was never truly her own. Marriage was not born from love, but from alliance, strategic unions meant to strengthen clans or secure loyalty to a lord. Behind the sliding doors of the household, women lived under constant watch, their movements restricted, their chastity guarded like property. A wife's duty was obedience, and her body became a tool of political currency. But this strict control had a shadow side. The samurai elite feared scandal as much as they feared defeat on the battlefield. When a lord went to war, his retainers and even his wife could be expected to prove loyalty in ways that modern eyes would find disturbing. Some were forced into ritual abstinence, others into testing situations orchestrated by older retainers. It was not uncommon for powerful lords to demand the bodies of their vassals' wives or daughters as tokens of submission. And yet, these humiliations were rarely recorded in official histories, instead buried beneath euphemisms of service or gift. Even more shocking were the intimate practices between men themselves. Among the warrior class, same-sex relations, known as shudo, the way of youths, were not only accepted but ritualized. A young apprentice, often in his early teens, would be paired with an older samurai. Their relationship was one of mentorship, but also one of physical intimacy. These bonds were seen as a way to strengthen loyalty and trust, binding the youth to his master with both sword and flesh. Scrolls preserved from the 16th century describe these practices in matter-of-fact terms, but always with strict rules. The relationship had to be temporary, lasting only until the boy came of age. It was not to interfere with marriage or with the production of heirs. Yet behind these regulations, the practice reveals a truth about samurai life. Desire was not free. It was regulated, structured, and turned into a tool of control. What modern readers might view as exploitation was, in the eyes of the warrior elite, another form of discipline, another weapon in the arsenal of power. For the wives, concubines, and servants of the samurai, the reality was even harsher. If a castle fell, women became the spoils of war. Some were forced into slavery, others into marriages arranged by victors. To avoid such humiliation, many samurai wives were compelled to commit jigai, the female counterpart to seppuku. With a dagger pressed to their throats, their legs bound to preserve dignity, they ended their lives before they could be taken. These suicides were not acts of personal choice, but acts demanded by the cruel arithmetic of honor. In rare cases, however, the testimonies of women who survived reveal another side. Diaries smuggled out of Kyoto during the Sengoku period speak of women forced into the private chambers of lords, their resistance crushed by threats to their families. Some endured quietly, others turned their suffering into quiet rebellion, encoding their trauma in poetry, in songs, or in whispered confessions to temple scribes. These documents, fragile and nearly erased by time, are among the few surviving windows into the hidden suffering of samurai women. For the wives, concubines, and servants of the samurai, the reality was even harsher. If a castle fell, women became the spoils of war. Some were forced into slavery, others into marriages arranged by victors. To avoid such humiliation, many samurai wives were compelled to commit jigai, the female counterpart to seppuku. With a dagger pressed to their throats, their legs bound to preserve dignity, they ended their lives before they could be taken. These suicides were not acts of personal choice, but acts demanded by the cruel arithmetic of honor. In rare cases, however, the testimonies of women who survived reveal another side. Diaries smuggled out of Kyoto during the Sengoku period speak of women forced into the private chambers of lords, their resistance crushed by threats to their families. Some endured quietly, others turned their suffering into quiet rebellion, encoding their trauma in poetry, in songs, or in whispered confessions to temple scribes. These documents, fragile and nearly erased by time, are among the few surviving windows into the hidden suffering of samurai women. The strictness of samurai morality meant that transgressions were often met with brutality. A servant caught in an affair with his lord's wife could expect execution, his body displayed as a warning. A samurai who failed to restrain his desires might be ordered to commit seppuku, his shame erased in blood. Yet the same system that punished also demanded secrecy. Scandals were hushed, records destroyed, and participants silenced. What remained were whispers in temple archives, coded love letters, and rumors that survived only in the oral traditions of forgotten villages. When Japan opened to the West in the 19th century, many of these practices were deliberately erased from the narrative of the samurai. The Meiji government sought to present the warrior class as paragons of discipline and honor, fit to inspire a modern nation. But the documents remained. In the late 20th century, historians began piecing together the fragments: diaries hidden in monastery chests, erotic paintings depicting samurai in their pages, confessions from wives who had been forced into silence. What emerges is not a tale of romance, nor even of private desire. It is a history of power expressed through sexuality, of intimacy weaponized for control. The samurai were warriors, yes, but they were also men and women trapped in a system that demanded absolute obedience, even in the most private aspects of life. To speak of the samurai only as warriors is to tell half the story. Their swords carved history, but their secret practices shaped the lives of countless people in ways that remain hidden beneath the surface of official chronicles. In the candlelit silence of their chambers, in the rituals of Shudo, in the enforced chastity of wives, and the desperate suicides of women, another side of Bushido emerges, one defined not by glory, but by control, suffering, and silence. And so, when we look at the statues of proud warriors in armor, or the painted screens of great battles, we must remember the unseen world behind them. A world where desire was twisted into duty, where intimacy was bound by chains of honor, and where the human body itself became another battlefield in the life of the samurai.